I'd like to begin by acknowledging that the Cambridge Art Gallery is on the land of Indigenous peoples dating back countless generations. We recognize that it is part of the Haldimand Tract, the traditional land of the Six Nations of the Grand River and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. As we gather virtually tonight, we recognize that many places from which we gather continue to be home to many Indigenous people. We recognize that our standard of living is derived from Indigenous lands and resources, and we are grateful for the opportunity to learn, live, and work together. We offer our gratitude to the First Nations for their care for and teachings about our earth and our relations. May we honor those teachings. Merci, miigwech. I have the honor this evening to introduce you to two fabulous jurors. In the room here, we also have some of the artists listening in, and we have the amazing curator who put this all together. So we're going to have really good insights into this fabulous exhibition, which is Fibreworks 2022. I would like to introduce you to Yasmeen Nematt Alla, an Egyptian immigrant and settler living in Turtle Island, known as Toronto. Her practice centers alienated collectivist narratives from an immigrant and interpreter's perspective. As someone who lives between cultures, she deciphers language barriers attached to togetherness through textiles, performance, and reactive sculptures that are often situated in social practice. She wonders how translations, experience, and visuals intertwine with care, grief, and community building. She has most recently exhibited at the Greville Gallery, Gladstone Hotel, and X Space Cultural Center. As an artist worker, she supports art organizations in creating accessible and anti-racist modes of communicating in their everyday operations. Welcome, Yasmeen. And we have Hitoko Okada, who's an interdisciplinary fiber artist, storyteller, and curator currently living in Hamilton, Ontario. She has continued to develop her craft practice through artist residencies and workshops at Haystack School of Craft in Maine, USA, in Kawashima School of Textiles in Kyoto, Tokyo, Japan. Pardon me, Japan. Her projects, exhibitions, performances, and programs have been publicly presented in Vancouver, Toronto, Burlington, and Hamilton. She is a recipient of the Hamilton City Arts Award for Established Arts and Crafts. Congrats. A core member of the Hamilton Seven Story Collective and a member of the Burlington Handweaver and Spinner Guild. She is currently developing a research-based body of work exploring the history of ancestral knowledge of cultural heritage craft of Japanese indigo, kakishibu dye, and shihu weaving, supported by the Ontario Art Council and the Canadian Art Council. These two individuals are outstanding, and we are very grateful that they took on the challenge of thoughtfully jurying 250 submissions. I arrived at the gallery the day this exhibition was being installed, so I'll leave it to Hitoko and Yazmin to give you some behind-the-scenes insight in the jurying process and their reflections on their exhibitions. Carly will also be giving you some insights as she is the curator of this exhibition. If you have any questions, please feel free to add them into the QA section. It should be right at the bottom of your screen. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you so much, Elise. Yasmeen and Hitoko, would you like to get the evening started and maybe chat a little bit about what it was like jurying in a virtual environment, and also what it was like to go through 250 submissions, because that's no small task. And we also have a PowerPoint that we can share in the background while we chat, and we can reference the various works as they come up on screen if you like.
Oh, sounds great. Thank you, Carly.
You're welcome.
So Hitoko, what was it like to jury 250 applications?
Yeah, I've never had to jury that many applications before, and it was a daunting task, but initially I started my process, which is to go through each application and write notes, and read through the artist statements and the CV, and like after 20 of them, I was like, okay, this process is not working here. Like this isn't. I'm gonna be here like for a week. So yeah, so I had to adapt quite quickly, and you know, and what I was really leaning on was there were, like, as I was going through some of them, I could start seeing different artists' work speaking to each other, and seeing connections, and I you know, I could see connections through everybody's work, but it just really came down to me for what the connections were alive in this moment for me, and where the connections I felt were really strong. And I felt that it was important to you know, have a representation across Canada as much as we could, and also the different approaches to material, and yeah, and different voices. And I'll ping pong that back to you, Yasmeen. What was your experience?
I'm gonna echo a lot of these thoughts and sentiments. I remember when I first started, I was like, I'll go through a formal run of like just looking at the work, and then I'll go through like a run of reading about the work. And at around the 50 something mark, I was like, this is gonna take a long time. So I was very grateful actually for Carly, who had given us like a substantial amount of time to go through it, because it became that, like, you know, you can only do like 10 or so a day, and kind of, you know, try to take away the ones that really stood out to you. I know that in terms of being cognizant of materiality, for example, like the nice thing about fiber arts in general is that you're thinking about the formal quality of the work, and you're thinking about the actual conceptual piece of it, but the materiality is really hard when it comes to online sort of jurying, because all you want to do, my first curiosity in every single one is like, oh, what is that made of? And I think the pieces that really drew me in that way, like made me curious, were always the ones that stood out the most, the ones I wanted to follow up, the ones I wanted to know more, that just left me with like a moment where I'm just like, I really feel like I could spend some time with this work if it was physically in front of me, which is the tragedy of being a fiber artist and working in an online realm, in an online world right now, I think, is that you can't just stand in front of it and deny yourself the want to actually touch that work. So a lot of my jurying process was very much like that, of like, what is making me ask more? What is pulling me through the screen, even though it's not even in front of me? And a lot of the works, Carly, the fact that you're on this work right now is really wonderful. But I think a really good example is actually this piece, like, I Will Never Be As Good As My Grandmother, which is already a title that's gonna knock you out. But having this work and watching it as like a video piece, I think was one of the earlier ones that definitely I kept like staring at it. And it like, even though I couldn't afford to put in so much time in every single piece because of how many there were, this one refused that sort of limitation and 100% pulled me in that way. And I want to believe that a lot of the works that we picked kind of did that, at least for me. I don't know. What about you, Hitoko?
Yeah, you know, like it was also there was a lot of unknowing in the process. And Yasmeen, you and I have not worked before, nor have met each other. And so, you know, being put into this situation where we've got, you know, a day to like, you know, make a selection, and it became quite like it became quite evident, right? Like I think in the very first round that while we had different viewpoints, there was a significant overlap with you and I in what you know, where our interests were and what we were drawn to. And so I just felt like that overlap, like we just kind of like leaned into that, you know, that weight, and that sort of led the selection process. And we managed to pull, you know, land at 13 that I felt were really strong, and it felt it felt really good, and the process was really quite smooth. And you know, it was a daunting task that was really quite efficiently done.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And even, you know, and the a bit of the hidden thing about jurying, which I think is not, like, as an artist, is not something that I think about when I'm either selected or not selected for a show, is that and I know Hitoko is the same, because when we were together, there were pieces that I really loved, and there were pieces that Hitoko really loved that we didn't agree on. Right. And I really want to, you know, like, pay homage to those pieces, to those works too. It's like there were works that Hitoko, like, it's a negotiation, because it's a jury of two people. And, you know, Carly was abundantly patient with us when we kept being like, let's go through it one more time. Because some of the works that we agreed on were definitely the strongest ones. But you know, there were a couple of works here and there where I was like, oh man, my heart is in this work. I want to see it in real life. But because it didn't necessarily speak to the other works, or it didn't work in terms of space, it didn't work in terms of logistically, it couldn't function in that sort of thematic sort of setup. I think it's really important to even acknowledge that, is like, very, very rarely the work is rejected because it's just bad. Like that, I don't think that's ever truly true. I think it's sometimes the work is, you know, leaves such a beautiful impression on the jury, because I know I followed up with the works that I really loved that didn't necessarily make it on the show, and followed the artists themselves, because I was like, this is too beautiful, and if I don't see it in this show, I want to see it in another. The ones that we have right now are really wonderful, and they speak such a cohesive language, but the ones that didn't make it really held their own in different ways, and acknowledging that is important. I feel like there was a couple there where I was like, I think I remember Hitoko and I were like, are you sure you don't want to put it in here? Like, are we sure? But even there's something really graceful and care-based in that, knowing that even when we pick a work that is important to us, it needs to speak to the other pieces rather than just because I like it. You know what I mean? So it becomes a little bit more of an objective conversation rather than a super subjective one.
Yeah, and you know, for me, it was about halfway through, it became really clear to me like where we were going, and that started to make it really, really easy and really clear for the deciding factor. Yeah.
Oh, I love this work so much.
I just want to add to what both of you were saying, and Yasmeen, I think you summed it up so beautifully, and you've reminded me of what one of my mentors would always say, and I try to keep that in my ear, and they would say, not for this show, like it's for another show. And I think, you know, 250 works, there's a lot of good work in those submissions, and I mean, I take my hat off to both of you too, because as I said at the beginning, that's not an easy task to go through. And I think part of what we wanted to do with this virtual opening, since, you know, it's virtual and not in person at the moment, is kind of to demystify that process and kind of go behind the scenes of what it's like to jury, you know, a biannual like Canada-wide a show and kind of get to those details. Just so I think, you know, like I said, to demystify it, I think some people are kind of interested in how things come to be. So thank you both. Again, it was a long day when we were on Zoom for, what was it, about 6 or 7 hours, but it was also a wonderful day. And I'm just so thankful that the two of you are this year's jurors. So thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm gonna echo that. Hitoko, you mentioned like we hadn't really met before, and we hadn't really had much like interactions. But you know, it's really kind of, I was super illuminated by a lot of your experience that you brought to the table. And like a lot of my practice is based in like building care-based spaces, and online spaces are super hard to make care-based. But, you know, we spent that day together, and there was such a really nice back and forth of like, how do we care for work that isn't our work? And how do we do work justice while still allowing for it to like flourish in its own right, but also flourish in a space that we hadn't seen, and work that we hadn't seen, and artists that we might not have been familiar with. So big shout out to my partner in crime in this sort of setting. I learned so much in the process, I know. And there was some just really loving and tender about the way we did it all. And I think, and I hope it gets reflected in the kind of space that you go in and kind of see when you do visit the show, because I really hope the folks go and visit the show to the best of their ability.
Yes, thank you for naming that. I did feel that the process was very thoughtful and caring and loving and gentle and considerate and spaciousness for everyone. And I certainly came into the process with that intention, and I felt that reciprocity 100%.
And for me, having to be the privilege of being in the Zoom room with the two of you, I tried to take that element of care that the two of you created in the jurying process when I was laying out the works in the space, because you were so thoughtful, and I really wanted to reflect how thoughtful the two of you were as you went through these works. And you know, you picked up the themes that kind of created this lovely version of Fibreworks, the 19th version. And it's always interesting, I think, curating, not only jurying, but curating a group show when you haven't seen the works in person. And I can talk a little bit about what that process is like. So my colleague Matt, who's doing the PowerPoint for us behind the scenes tonight, he's the exhibition coordinator. We basically worked on a small model, a very small model of the gallery, and printed out little images of each of the works that were selected, and just to try and get a sense of what they looked like together, how they kind of talked to one another, keeping that idea of balance and harmony and care and thoughtfulness. I think we're trying to keep that throughout the show. And my goal was to make it so that each work could stand alone and have its moment as the community comes in to look at the work, but also that, you know, it has conversations with its closest neighbors, or even if they're neighbors from across the room. And I mean, and that's really down to the works that Hitoko and Yasmeen chose. I mean, they all really work strongly together. And I really wanted to kind of take that up and make the space like that. So after we worked in this little 3D model, I got, you know, I've got it here, I can show you my little floor plan. It's not to scale by any means, but just kind of trying to rough it out where I thought things might sit nicely. And then, of course, once you get the work delivered, it's a little different when you actually see it in real life. And so there's a little bit of moving around and kind of shuffling things this way or that way. And I think it's a pretty nicely balanced show, and I hope that when people come to visit, that they get that feeling that that Hitoko and Yasmeen kind of how they juried the show of this thoughtful, caring environment. So I hope that is reflected in how I've laid out the space. And I don't know if maybe this is a good time, the two of you might want to talk about some of the themes that you saw emerging, if that feels good.
Toko, you can start us off. I read your statement when you had written it, and I thought it summed up everything so wonderfully.
Okay. Actually, this piece here from made by Shaya Ishaq was the piece that was the starting point for me, and started to steer you know, my selection. The reading the artist's statement around how weaving is connected to lineage, ancestral knowledge, what spirit that and that knowledge that lives in our DNA, and in traditional craft practices. This was something that speaks very close to my heart, and I was also picking up on that thread in many of the works that were submitted. So this was a narrative that, and a thread that I found that just kept weaving throughout the selection. This piece as well by Pauline Harbauli, you know, the cloth that was used are traditional heritage craft tea towels, and she stitches them with her hair. And so, you know, this is also something that she spoke to about around like surviving war and connection, connecting to family and to memory and to loss, and that knowledge being in the DNA as well, and through cultural heritage craft. And I love this piece so much. Because my work as a clothing designer, and a garment maker, the artist Erin James has taken this zipper off of a garment that I believe was being put on or tried to be fitted onto someone who had mobility issues, and so the zipper was in the way or not working, and thinking about a closure, like a garment closure, and accessibility, and so in all of, and a lot of the works, there's this thread around craft, textiles, garment, and identity. I feel like I've been talking a bit now, so I will pass it to you, Yasmeen.
I put you on the spot because I knew you were just going to set it up really nicely. And I didn't want to do the hard work of that. Or I all of the above, obviously. I think one of the things that are running through the show that are really wonderful, and is why I think this show like just gives you a really nice pause, is just there's a lot of intergenerational melancholy. There is, like Hitoko was saying, there's a lot of ancestral knowledge, craft, but also trauma and grief and care being passed on in a lot of the works that exist in the show. And I think, you know, we talk so much about how identity work can sometimes be surface, can sometimes act in a way that points to a problem but never discusses it. And I think this show goes very much beyond that first layer of providing gestures like a caution tape, for example, that is made of sequins, and offer it as both an identity marker and a community marker, but also an acknowledgement of the things and the knowledge and the grief that exists inside and outside of those communities. How are we seen by the world, but also how do we see each other as we exist in the communities that we exist in? Like, I'm gonna point to Florence's piece. I don't know if you have a photo of it. The scramble of the slides, thank you. Please do not touch. I'm a big fan of Florence's pieces in general. I'm a big fan of their work, but I do love this piece quite a bit. The way the text works, and the fact to see that sort of gesture offered falling off the floor and then having the red dots bleed into the wall is such a conversation on existing as an artist of color in the art world, and how do we exist as people who are on the margins in a capitalist system that doesn't want us to exist in it. How do we exist as something more? And I think a lot of the works make a lot of commentaries around these things in general, but this work was one of the most that I definitely felt centered a lot of the show for me, because it talked about some of the issues that I've been thinking about, and it talked about some of the things that I feel I've been having conversations with folks about, of like, how can we be people of color and also make art and also sell art and also exist and be alive and not feel like we're offering our trauma for the audience. And a lot of the work, I think, touches on these ideas of like, how do we be both? How can we exist in both of those spheres? How do we be witnesses of each other's melancholy and ancestral knowledge and materiality in both its metaphorical sense and physical sense, while also still surviving, while also continuing to make thoughtful, intentional work. And those were some of the earlier kind of thoughts that kind of just became very obvious at the end when we picked the 13 pieces. Because when you go and you kind of sit in the show, you can almost like taste it in the different works of, there's a sadness there, but there's also an acknowledgement that sits with each of the pieces really well. And I feel like I just went on a rant, but.
Thank you both so much. I'm every time we talk, I'm always blown away about, and I keep echoing it, your thoughtfulness and your care, just in general. So again, thank you so much for bringing your expertise and your caringness to this exhibition, and because I really think your voice is kind of flow throughout in this instance. I'm wondering if we want to open it up to the Q&A for the audience. There is one more of a comment for you, Yazmeen, from Florence. They are also a very big fan of your work too. So I just wanted to pass that on. It's so wonderful. Now I think each of you might have had a question for each other to to get us started on the Q&A. But yes, audience, please feel free if you have comments or questions, please feel free to drop it into the Q&A located at the bottom of your screen at any time.
Hitoko, do you want to start or do you want me to start?
Sure. Yeah, I'll start the Q&A. So I have a question for Yasmeen. So Yazmin, you were a participant. You had a piece selected and exhibited in the Fibreworks last year, and then this year you were jurying. And I just thought that you had a very interesting point of view into this whole process, and I just wondered if you could share some of your thoughts or perspectives on from that lens.
It's so weird. I'm not even gonna lie. It's so weird being in an exhibition of something and then having folks being like, would you like to pick the pieces? And I'm like, no, that's terrible. That sounds like a lot of work. I'm bad at rejecting art. I think all art is great. Well, you know what I mean? I'm just like, it's a terrible job, but I kind of want to do it. So I think this is a fun question because the show that I was in is really dear to my heart. I had my traumatic blankets there, and we were still at, like, it was beginning pandemic, I want to say, and it was like a weird time, and we didn't know. Like, I remember Matt sending multiple emails of like, the show will move on, y'all, and me being like, I don't think so. There was a lot of negotiation, and not to say at all that we are in any way at the end of the pandemic, but in a world that's a little different from the world that we started at. I think there are different negotiations because the fact that an exhibition happened in the first place at all was a bizarre experience when I exhibited the piece. Because I had no idea how the art world would recover from a world that had COVID, / still has COVID. So that was weird. Being on the other side now and kind of seeing the works, I can't help but carry myself as, like, obviously an artist and a juror, but also as like a person who went through a global traumatic collective event. And I know even in some of the works, even if maybe that wasn't part of the intention or the conceptual thought behind the work, I couldn't help but read, oh, we went through a collective traumatic event together. I think this work is somewhat touching on that. And I don't know if that was even something that people thought about when they juried the work for my show, right? Because it was, at the time, we just didn't have an equivalent of this. So that must have, you know, like, I didn't exist at that point as this person, but existing now, knowing that I don't think I will ever be able to look at work and not somewhat read. You exist in an online and a physical world. You exist in a world where we are discussing modes of accessibility that we've never discussed before, and we're also disregarding a lot of the lessons that we were taught when we were in the height of the pandemic. And what is it like to be someone who looks at art and chooses art now? So that was something, you know, that I didn't know was going to be a thing until I started looking at the works. Like, I know when Carly emailed me, I was just like, oh, this sounds super great. And then I started looking at the works and I'm like, are they all talking about COVID? And it's like, probably not. You know what I mean? Like, I'm sure they're not all talking about COVID, but maybe some of them are. Or maybe they're just people who experienced this event and can't help but leave a couple of the pieces in there. And I don't know if the works I made then had that, even though they were exhibited at the height of that pandemic, because that's not when I made them. Because now I feel like anything I make is a little bit talking about it, because it feels like it has become part of my life in every way, shape, or form. I don't know if that's an answer, but I think that's the one I have. And Hitoko, in return, my question, and you have a collection of gorgeous works and a lifetime of just career that is incredible. And I kind of am interested to see, as someone who is established in your career and have, the anecdotes that you do have, I'm really curious about what was really exciting for you in terms of fiber and materiality when it comes to a show like this, because this is a unique show, right? It's not just like, let's put sculpture and paintings and all sorts of work in. It was like, no, let's extend what materiality is. So I kind of want to know, like, what was exciting for you in terms of materiality here?
Yeah, thank you for this question. Yeah, what was exciting for me? I come from a lineage of kimono makers and cabinet makers. I come from a family of craft makers, and fiber and textile has been part of how my family has we would make things together, and that's how we would spend time. And then the other times we're just like fighting because we're super dysfunctional. But anyway, but that's through fiber, through craft, through handwork is how we know how to be resilient, and how we know how to survive economic crisis and war and like, in personal, internal, like personal, interpersonal, and global crises. So fiber has always been central in my life, and all the other things that are connected to fiber, like plants and having plant relationships, and for me that those are deeply ancestral, and connects me to who I am as a human being, my role as a person on this planet at this time. And what is exciting to me about the opportunity that was offered to me to jury this show, I had no idea there would be 250. I mean, I don't think anyone could see that one coming. But I'm like, all of the work, like the work that I curate, the shows, the exhibitions that I curate, are always connected to cloth, fiber, fashion, textiles, and to learn more about the Cambridge Art Gallery, as that being a gallery like that is specializes in that, and also the history of Cambridge. And that's an exciting piece there for me is that I'm doing some research on Hamilton's history of textiles. And so, like during the Industrial Revolution that was happening here, and the during Canada's Confederation, like that, it wasn't just Hamilton, but like, Cambridge and like the whole surrounding area. So having the opportunity to work with Cambridge Art Galleries was something I really wanted, and was so delighted to have the opportunity, and also to, like, during this jurying process was like a very intense way of learning so many Canadian fiber artists. Like what a gift. It was such a gift. It was intense, but it was a gift. And just having, going through the submissions and having just that intimacy with an artist's work, and being like, oh, this is happening in the Gulf Islands. Oh, this is happening in Nova Scotia, and also seeing like regionally what issues are alive, in Thunder Bay and other, so like all of that is super yummy, and yeah, I deeply loved that. Yeah, I think
Yummy is a great adjective. We should use it more universally.
Oh, thank you both so much for sharing. Again, I keep thanking you guys over and over again, but it's so true. Like I feel so just delighted again. I think I keep saying that as well, but it's such an honor for both of you to just be here and share your knowledge. And I'm so glad the experience, as daunting as 250 submissions is and was to get through, I'm glad that you both found it good at the same time. Like it's fun, it's challenging, but it's fun as well. And it is what struck me is just not only how many people are kind of taking up this fiber and textile as a medium, but it's how they're interpreting it in such different ways, which I found was really incredible and lovely and surprising. And I'm excited to see, as things progress. And but I will stop rambling, and I will just say we have another comment from the audience, and they're just saying they really love the work in the exhibition. Kudos to the jurors for their selections, and I echo that sentiment 100%. The works you two chose are just fabulous, and to the artists who created that work, thank you so much, because it's really incredible. We're wrapping up towards the end, but if anyone has any comments or questions, please feel free to jump in. We're happy to answer them, whatever they may be. I don't know, Alix, if you have anything you want to add.
No, not too much. It was really interesting for me because my personal practice as an artist has leaned into textiles quite recently, and I was looking out, how do I get into this world, and where are these exhibited, and that's how I found Fibreworks before being employed here as director. So it had already caught my eye, and I got the absolute pleasure of showing up the day that we unpacked everything, and it felt like my birthday and Christmas mixed all together, because I had no idea. I had no background. I didn't do the laborious work that the jurors did and Carly did. So for me, it was just such a delight to see them unfold and learn about them. And it was such a beautiful way of being introduced to the gallery. And I really do appreciate the thoughtfulness he has put into that. It must have been quite the feat. And like Yazmeen mentioned, which I think resonates with how I feel about it, it's daunting and it's not fun, because you have to, like, you think about it, 250, 13 got accepted. That's so many times you have to say no. And sometimes it is heartbreaking. So, I mean, it was definitely very, selected very strongly, and Carly did a fantastic job curating it. I would like to also thank Matthew, because watching him put this together and do it so craftfully, without a hitch, I mean, that was the professional touch that this show kind of got. And altogether, I think it's been really wonderful for me to just walk into this exhibition, selected the way it was, with the jury the way it was, and just created such a wonderful way for me to be introduced to the space. And I do thank you for offering that for me in my personal experience.
A couple more comments from the audience. Don Kwan, who is one of the artists in Fibreworks, he just says, not a question, just a big thank you. So thank you, Don. Your work is beautiful. Catherine also says, thank you so much. We really enjoyed all the comments, and we hope to see the show live. I really hope you can too. Pictures don't do the work justice. If you happen to be popping through Cambridge, please stop on by. Another one of the artists, Heather Yip, just wanted to thank everyone for the experience. So excited to dive into all the other artist practices. And also a shout out to Bill, who picked up the work to drive it across country. He was super kind too and thoughtful. Yes, that's good. I'm very glad to hear that the art handlers were good and lovely to work with. That's always a plus to hear. We do have one question from the audience. Tracy asks, were the jurors required to choose 13 works, or how did that number evolve? And I can answer that a little bit. We didn't really say you have to select this many or be within 10 to 20. It was more looking at the size and scale of the works and in relation to the space, what could fit. And then I can pass it over to Yasmeen and Hitoko to elaborate a little bit more. But it really kind of boils down to like what works together, what works in the space. And that's kind of how the works are selected. So I will turn it over to you two if you have anything else to add.
Yeah, I think I'm just gonna echo that. Like, I think it was a matter of like, some of the pieces are big. Like, you know what I mean? It's just some of those pieces are like good size. So I think it was just a matter of like, how do we give the pieces room to breathe while still accommodating is not the right word, but more of like making space for the work to take up and really like Carly, I know you mentioned earlier, just have the work stand on its own as a work of an artist and their own experience and their history in that work, but also existing in the space itself. And I know there was like, based on the sizes of the works, we went up a couple of numbers and went down a couple of numbers. Yeah, I think that was mainly the reason for the number. It's an unlucky number though. So.
Or perhaps lucky.
Perhaps.
We could change it.
We're setting a new precedent. 13 is now lucky.
13 is the new lucky number.
13 is the new lucky. You heard it here first, folks.
But I think that's a great question because it shows how there's another layer to jurying. Like you're not just selecting the works you like, you're figuring out how they work together just like on a narrative basis, but then how are they going to speak together in a space, and do they have enough space to breathe and respect what they were meant to do? So it's really interesting because it takes a lot of thinking and visualizing and curatorial background to be able to kind of put those puzzle pieces together.
Definitely. And considering, I think I just gave the two of you a floor plan. Possibly a photo of previous exhibitions that you had to go on, since we weren't technically in lockdown, but we were still trying to be mindful of were we? No, the gallery. I think the gallery was open, or we might have been closed. I can't remember. Okay, we were open. But
there was a work that we were like, oh, we love this work, and then I don't think we even noticed it was like 6 feet until well into the process. We're like, wait a second, how big is the work? So there were a couple of those moments where we're like, oh my god, incredible work, and then we look at how big it is, we're like, okay, can we accommodate this in a way that makes sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think I just like hearing the stories. I'm remembering like at one point we were going through one set of rounds, and I was like, oh, that's a lot of floor pieces. We don't have that much floor. And there's like very few works on the wall, like very few wall works. Like we gotta, and so these are some of the things that start to shape and change the direction and inform the final selection.
Yeah,
you never think about when you're selected as an artist, that like the only reason something might have happened is because there were 17 floor pieces in a show that had walls, and I'm like, something needs to give. It's such a funny thing. It's just like now like I'm giving so much grace to anyone who rejects me in a show. I'm just like, no, it makes sense. You probably didn't have enough floor for what I just gave you. Okay.
Oh. But it's true. You are bound by the physical limitations of space in some circumstances, which is sometimes a shame, but that's how it is sometimes. But like as I mentioned earlier, just because it's not this show doesn't mean it won't be in another show. So I always kind of like to think about that when when we're doing these big juried shows and all shows really. There's always opportunity for future things to happen. So, and just a couple more comments from the audience. One of the other artists, Erin, just says, yes, a huge thank you. And Shaya as well, thank you so much for tonight. So honored to be a part of the show. I'm excited to see the show in person. We are so honored to have your work in the show. So thank you for applying, Shaya, and I really hope that you are able to come soon. That would be fantastic. And please let us know. I'd be delighted to pop out and say hi if you're in, and for any of you too, that if you ever want, if you're in the area, please just reach out. I'd be delighted to meet you in person. And if that's everything, unless there's any final questions, I think we'll wrap up for this evening. And I'll turn it over to you, Alix. Thank you so much. Thank you, Hitoko and Yazmin. It's been such a wonderful night, and I just love talking to you both each time we've had these opportunities. So thank you both so much.
Well, I have nothing new to say because all I have to say is thank you to everyone involved. I mean, it's been a wonderful pleasure of mine to arrive at the beginning of this exhibition, to see it unfold and learn about all the fantastic people who were involved. Thank you to the artists, obviously to our fantastic jurors, and congratulations to the gallery team. You guys did an outstanding job. And you did it without a director. And I mean, we had support all over, which I really also appreciate. And thank you to everyone who did support the gallery to make this exhibition a reality. It will be open until the first week of October, so quite a bit of time to be able to make it in. And luckily, it has fantastic hours, so you can even make it an evening visit. But if you do, don't be shy to reach out. Just like Carly, I would love to meet everybody who comes to visit it, and always excited to chat about such beautiful, stunning work. So we'll leave it for this evening. Please take care. Thank you very much, everyone.